Hello, magical experimenters, and welcome to the latest episode of the Magical Experiments podcast. Today, I'm going to be talking about the topic of telepathy, ESP, or extrasensory perception, and magic. And specifically, this came about because I was asked, can you talk about head work and magic used to influence people? Whoo boy, this is an interesting topic, and it's one where we get into a couple of different realms. One of those realms is around the ethics of this kind of work. Should we even engage in something along the lines of what can be involved, like in terms of influencing people? And first, let's just be honest here. We live in an environment where there is constant levels of influencing going on. I mean, if you get on social media, how many ads do you see, right? You go through your Facebook, and it's like every third or fourth post there's an ad, and that's like a sponsored ad. That's not even including content that somebody puts out there. And hey, I'll fully admit it. I mean, I put out stuff about my classes. Even this video that I'm putting out, it, quote unquote, can be considered as a form of influence because I'm sharing my knowledge and information in the hopes that you'll want to learn more about how I can work with you or things like that. I own it. I'm calling it out for what it is. But we're already dealing with, what I'll say is a lot of psychic, mental, emotional, etc. information that is crowding in our space. And that's not even including something where we're having somebody who's trying to engage in that form. The other realm is this stuff even possible? I mean, and this I'm kind of referring to, for example, like telepathy, extrasensory perception, acts of telekinetics, levitation, things like that. Let me first off say I've yet to see anyone ever do an act of levitation. I've never seen anyone levitate to this day, and I've been practicing magic for over 30 years. And I've seen a lot. I never have seen anyone like telekinetically move up pencils from one end to the other or do something else like that. I've had people claim they could do that, but I've yet to see it. The closest that I would say I've come to telekinetic power is trying to influence the way that a die might roll. Like rolling a die. Even then, I'm kind of like, have I really done anything, or not? I can't tell for sure. But telepathy is a different thing. I have had experiences where I've had experiences both where I have done some type of telepathic work, or I've had people do some kind of telepathic work. And I think it is real. So while I do question some aspects of what I've heard, people levitating and telekinetic powers, because again, I have yet to see that in the world, I still nonetheless would say that I sometimes have questioned whether or not this is something that I've experienced. Like, is this a reality? Is this something that's actually true? But when it comes to telepathy and quote unquote head work or stuff like that, yes, I do think it's real. I remember one experience that I had. This was when I was really young. I was like 18 or 19. I was hanging out with a friend, and we were just talking, and all of a sudden, like, I could read his mind. And I started sharing stuff with him, and he was like, whoa. And it was just this really intense space where we were like kind of going back and forth, and I was guessing stuff and so I was like, okay, there was something here. And that was an early experience I've had. But then over the years, I've had experiences with people where I've experienced some kind of telepathic connection with somebody. And it's actually gotten to the point where I've actually very purposely built up very specific defenses, magical defenses around this stuff. So, and I actually have a class called Combat and Protection Magic where I talk about some of these things. And I'll drop a link in the episode directly to that class. So if you're interested, you can pick it up. But it's a pre-recorded class, so this isn't like one of my live classes. This is something I developed years ago as a pre-recorded class, but it's got some great content. And I talk about like how to put together some of the defenses around this, because I think that admittedly, I'm rocking the Charles Xavier look right now from X-Men with my bald head. But we don't want to go dark Charles Xavier, like where he's like purposely manipulating people with his mind and stuff like that. And so like I'll admit, when I saw this question, I was kind of like, I can talk about it, but do I really want to go? Because this could be really sketchy. I mean, this comes down to, from an ethical perspective, like consent. And is the person consenting to having their mind read? Is the person consenting to having you go through? And they may not even be fully aware that you're doing what you're doing. They might just intuitively sense that something's off. I've had the same experience with other people, where I've sometimes had experiences and where it's been kind of like, well, did I agree to that or not? I don't know that I agreed to it. And of course, some people would say, well, like, look, when we get into magic, there are some aspects of this where you go full black magic, full, head on, like I'm gonna do what I want to do and get what I want or whatever else. And I'm always like, person can do that, but they've also got to live with like kind of the consequences of that. And I do think with something like this, yes, technically you can read someone else's mind. Yes, technically you could influence or push them a certain direction. And no, I really don't think you should do it. I really think it's important to if we're gonna have if we're naturally gifted this way, to use this power for good. One of the ways that I look at it in terms of my own experience is that, for me, if I am picking up information from someone else, that I'm really doing it as a way of holding space with that person because they're sharing something with me. So like if I'm doing spiritual consulting or men's coaching or something along those lines, that I'm holding space with that person and taking in the information that they're sharing. I honestly think to some degree or another, we're all telepathic. I think that there is we have this sense of individuality, right? Like our own minds and our own bodies and our own identity. But I think really there is kind of like a hive mind consciousness at work within humanity, or a super consciousness. And so a lot of times there's that aspect. So, I mean, if you think about it from that perspective, what I do unto someone else, I am also doing unto myself. So like if I were to, for example, use like a sense of telepathic awareness and push that on to somebody else, well, I'm also opening the door to have that pushed on to me. I don't know, like I think it's an incredibly intimate act if I were to even be able to read someone else's mind. And honestly, the one thing I will say is that, I mean, if I knew how to read someone else's mind, it doesn't really mean that much. I mean, it still hasn't put me in a situation where I've not, like, where I'm not getting into trouble with somebody, or I'm not upsetting somebody or something like that. And if anything, it kind of opens the door for a level of abuse, if you will, of trauma that I think is really problematic. So my advice would really be that if you are in tune and in touch with that telepathic awareness, that you're not using it to try and get people to do things for you. You really consider the ethics of it, because you have to live with that. And granted, there are some genuinely shitty people out there in the world who probably can do something along those lines and not give a damn. But I'm not one of those people. And I'm hoping that most of you watching this, if not all of you watching this, aren't one of those people. One of the reasons I came up with that course that I mentioned earlier is precisely, though, to deal with people like that. Because, I mean, I have dealt with some people that have been, done some ethically gray things. And I'm not going to say that I haven't occasionally done some stuff too, as far as just like magical work. I haven't done anything as far as like telepathy goes or anything along those lines. It's always been whatever experience I've had of it, it's been more along the lines of, okay, I seem to have this awareness of this person. This ability to quote unquote read or connect with them to some degree or another. I'm going to take that information in and be present with it and be present with that person and hold space. Again, I think that this is really kind of important, that in general we look at how we behave and show up. How do I want to show up? So like, for example, if I can read someone else's mind, like I'm doing the Charles Xavier thing here now, right? But if I can read their mind, what do I want to do with that information? Well, ethically, I think that I am honor bound to really be like, okay, if there is information here, let's really just, not take advantage of it, not use this to get something from this person. Instead, let's really be present and aware and with this person. Let's hold space with this person. Let's be present with this person and what they are sharing. And that's if there is, that should apply in general, whether or not there's telepathy in the mix, but I think that this is a really important thing to recognize. One of the things, I have another course called Psychic and Spiritual Perceptions. And now I'm not trying to sell you guys on these things. I'm just telling you because this is stuff I have. But one of the things that I end up talking about in there is again, like this cultivation of psychic awareness and power. It's recognizing really that it has more to do with connecting with the world more intimately and with other people more intimately and deeply, but doing it in a manner where it is above board. We have enough going on in our world where people are always trying to influence us. If you look at the psychology of advertising, for example, and how it's set up, it is set up to push people to make choices. And it kind of begs the question as to how individualistic we really are. We've been, in some cases, Western society has been sold on this idea of individualism, but I question that because the thing is that we aren't really individuals. We tend to group together. You have people that you associate with and connect with. There is a certain level of being or presence or awareness that comes into play. So I think when you look at that, you kind of are like, oh, hey, there's a reason I'm associating with some of these people. There's a like-mindedness. Like-minded people. Like, how many times have you heard that phrase before? Well, what does that really mean? So when I look at this question about, head work and doing magic to influence people. Look, let's be honest here. If I do magical work to get a job or I do magical work for other things, there's really, the fact of the matter is, in a very real sense, I'm trying to influence the world and I am trying to influence other people. I'm trying to influence what the outcome is going to be so that it's in my favor. I think we have to just be honest and own that, and that is part of a reality. I don't know anybody who does magical work where that doesn't come in as a factor. I guess if you only do purely devotional work to the gods or something like that and you're not asking for anything, maybe. But even then, I kind of question, because if the gods give you something, maybe, and again, maybe it's just like there's enough abundance in the world that everything can be shared. Like, whatever. Okay, maybe that is the case. But still, there's really no ands, ifs, or buts about this. When we're doing magical work in general, we are doing something to get something. And because we're doing it to get something, we're trying to influence the outcome, and we're doing it in order to get it for ourselves. And hey, let's own it. Let's own the fact that at heart, to some degree or another, we are looking out for ourselves. And we're doing this as a way to make it easier to live in this world. And then, if we know that and can acknowledge it, then let's also be honest and say, okay, in recognizing that, I am also, in trying to influence the world, I'm also trying to shape my experience of the world in a way that is positive, that could be positive for other people as well. If I'm going to look at influencing other people, telepathically, I have to really look at also, what am I opening myself up to? As I said, because if I'm doing it onto other people, I'm also kind of opening it to go both ways. And I think that that's a very real act, because the act of telepathy is a form of connection. Like, it's not just me doing something to someone else. It is me and that person connecting together. So there is a back and forth of information. And when you recognize that, it plays a role in the overall experience. It's like two hands touching. Like, my hand is touching this hand, but this other hand, obviously both, they're my hands. But if I was touching someone else's hand, my hand is touching that person's hand, but their hand is also touching mine. Our energies are commingling. Our thoughts, our emotions, etc. are commingling to some degree or another. And this is creating an exchange of information, an exchange of presence, an exchange of awareness. And yes, there can be some influencing. Let's recognize that for what it is, and also recognize that, like, the way that we show up matters. So can you? Yes, you can. Do you want to? I mean, that's up to you. Really look at your ethics, though. Really look at your sense of being, and also look at the way you show up in the world. And recognize that at some point, you know, this is that it can come around. And I'm not talking about this as the law of three or karma or anything else. I'm just saying that, like, there is a very real aspect to when you open that door, you're not just opening it one way, it's going both ways. I'm very careful with, quote unquote, my telepathy, such as it is. I mean, it's not something that I just throw around or use. There is a sense of awareness, there is an extrasensory aspect to it, and I'm very careful with it. Because I think that it behooves me to be careful with it. And I would say the same thing to anyone else. And I would also say, like, when you're doing magical work in general, you know, just recognize, like, there is an impact. I think one of the reasons why my own magical work has changed so much, and it's so focused now, like, on life design and on creating this overall shape of my life, is that I'm more interested in this overall outcome, where I'm creating a life where I'm able to be of service to my communities, as opposed to just getting that one thing that I think is going to somehow fulfill all the things and have all the answers. Well, really, it doesn't. What does? What has the answers? It's the way that I live my life. It's the way that I show up. It's the way I own my mistakes. Again, I'm not saying I'm a perfect person. I mean, I've definitely made my share of mistakes. I've done some things that I'm not proud of sometimes, and I've really had to take a good hard look at myself in the way that I've shown up. And I mean, I think at this point in my journey, I am, like, working really hard on changing the person that I am into the person that I want to be. And I'm aware that even when I become that person that I want to be, that there's always going to be things that I can, you know, where I can be a better person. You know, it's the way we show up in our lives. It's the way we show up for other people. It matters. It's a form of presence and power. And so I would suggest to someone who's interested in something along these lines, like, how do you really want to show up? And at the same time, like, cultivate those skills and be aware of how you can use them, in case you have somebody showing up in your life in a way that is not the way that you want. You know, being able to resist, you know, other people's mind games is an important aspect. And I'm not even just talking about, like, telepathy. I am talking about, like, you know, when somebody tends to be manipulative or gaslighting or things like that, because a lot of times that will happen. One of the skills that I've been working on in the last couple of years is learning to be more assertive, learning better boundaries. Part of that is having had experiences where I haven't had good boundaries and people have been able to walk all over, you know. Well, I've allowed that to happen because I was trying to people please. But part of that has been just having loose boundaries. I mean, it's even right down to the fact that the way that I approach magic once again is changing, where I'm not just doing an open-ended ritual. I'm really looking at how I close the circle as much as how I open it, because it matters. How I open the sphere and how I close the sphere, it matters. It sets the container, but it also brings an encapsulation of that container and allows it to go forth instead of creating messy lives, messy magic, messy headspaces. So that's my 2 cents on this topic. May not be quite the answer that the person was looking for. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty out there, but in fact, for that person, there is a book I'd recommend called Robert Cialdini wrote a book called Influence. Read that. You'll probably get some interesting ideas there, but it might also help you appreciate and understand how influence in general works in the world, and like how people use it in marketing and things like that. And if you don't think that that's a magical topic right there, let me tell you, it definitely is. All right, thank you and have a great day.